Welcome to False Claims, Real Consequences.
Welcome to False Claims, Real Consequences with employment attorney Stephen Teller, a veteran advocate who spent more than 20 years helping workers navigate retaliation, discrimination, severance issues, and legal gray zones in the workplace. I'm John Clemens. Today we're answering a question a lot of people have but don't always ask out loud. Is what I'm going through even legal? Whether it's unfair treatment, a toxic manager, or something that just feels off, this episode will help you figure out if you might have a legal claim and what to do next.
Yeah, John, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. I'm glad to have a chance to tell people, educate people about what's going on in this important part of their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is such an important question because I think anyone with a job or a boss or who works in a workplace has probably had this thought, is this legal right now? What's happening? So let's just start with that. What kind of workplace complaints are actually protected under the law, and what kind are really just bad management you have to work through?
Yeah, well, let's see. I mean, I get a ton of calls all the time from people many of whom have been treated really badly, and then, some of whom it's illegal. And I kind of have to talk for 5 minutes to explain it. Employment in most states, and certainly in Washington state, is what's known as employment at will, right? So the fundamental principle is they can do it. It's not illegal, right? Unless it's specifically illegal. So, hey, you're fired because we wanted a Capricorn instead of a Taurus. I mean, that wouldn't be illegal, right? You parted your hair on the wrong side of your head. Sorry, you're fired. Or we're giving you a bad performance review because, the stars didn't align. Those kinds of things, even if there's a good reason behind them, not illegal. There are, in my view, 4 main exceptions to employment at will, 3 of which apply in private employment, and 1 is just in government, right? And those are discrimination, retaliation and whistleblowing, contract issues, and if you work for government, there's a due process issue where they got to tell you about it. So, I mean, I can just kind of keep going and talk about the details of what that means, but those are the main exceptions.
Yeah, well, let's break down. I think you mentioned retaliation as one of the issues. So, like, what does that even look like? Is that someone who's punished for speaking up? And how is that different than just, kind of having an unpopular opinion?
Yeah, well, it's punished for speaking up about protected speech, punished for speaking up about something that is illegal as opposed to something that isn't. So, the boss is making a bad decision. You're speaking up, but you're right. The boss is wrong. You're trying to tell the vice president, you're trying to tell the boss themselves, look, we shouldn't do it that way. And the boss is just flat out being stupid or being, and they don't explain it to you. And they're just mad at you now. Not illegal, right? Retaliation for complaining about discrimination issues, retaliation for complaining about other illegal activity, those kinds of things are illegal. So it really depends on what the content is of what, made the company mad.
Okay, so I have a question for you. This is a bit off the cuff, so I apologize in advance, but in my mind, there are, poor decisions that get made sometimes. And sometimes it's just maybe a bad strategy or something like that. But other times it's might be illegal, or it might be immoral, or it might be unethical. And I'm curious, from your point of view as a lawyer, does it make any difference if it's one of those categories or another, or is it really not matter?
Yeah, no, it matters. Let's see. Where should I start with this? So, I mean, we talked a little bit about the 4 main exceptions to employment at will, right? There's discrimination, retaliation and whistleblowing, and contracts in private employment. And discrimination is protected class, right? Identity, demographics, race, gender, disability, age over 40, religion, national origin, different protected classes in different states. But there's federal law that says, you can't do this because of race. And that protects everybody, white people, black people, any other colors in the rainbow, right, are protected no matter which direction the discrimination goes. Okay, protected class. Then there's protected activity. To answer your question, I'll get there. Protected activity is when you're saying, hey, boss, we can't do that. And the thing you're protesting is, illegal or a right that you have somehow. So complaining about discrimination is protected activity. Hey, boss, stop touching my butt. Protected activity, right? Hey, boss, I think you're mistreating the Indian guy. I think you're mistreating the white guy. I think you're mistreating anybody because of race, gender, disability. Okay, that's retaliation. Retaliation, I call it. Retaliation for taking a medical leave, for asking for an accommodation for a disability. These are all in the category of protected activity that is clearly related to civil rights issues. Now there's a whole other category, and there's more variation between the states. I call it whistleblowing just to have a name for it. It's not a legal definition. And what I'm talking about there is just like every other protected activity. I'm supposed to be able to do jury duty in Washington. I'm supposed to be able to go to court to get a domestic violence protection order. I can complain about workplace safety issues. If I'm working in a hospital and there's a patient safety issue involved, right? If there's fraud against the government or customers, violating, somebody's patent, we don't have the license to do that, right? So if there's a immoral, illegal, or unethical thing going on, there's a good chance that it is protected activity to oppose it, but it's more of a Swiss cheese. There's some stuff where it's like, that's wrong, we shouldn't be doing this, and there's no law against it specifically, and so it's not protected activity.
I see. So, okay.
Yeah. And then one more little thing to that is like, they could get mad at you and act badly towards you, but not fire you. And for some of those things I just listed, that wouldn't be illegal until they make it so bad that they really force you out of the job.
So does that in turn kind of get into the difference between maybe what's a toxic work environment versus a hostile work environment? I mean, is that kind of in that realm?
Yeah, I think, because a hostile work environment has a specific, technical definition as, there's discrimination, it's unwelcome to you, it's because of one of those protected classes or protected activity, and the company knows about it because it's a manager doing it, or you complained about it, or it's just so open and notorious. Those are the elements of a hostile work environment, and that's illegal, and it's a type of discrimination. A toxic work environment, we could define right here as, anything else that is awful but isn't specifically protected by law. So, people talk a lot about, there's bullying and there was mobbing, everybody's against me. And, if that's because, they don't like you because, let's see, I'm trying to think of an example that doesn't implicate, disability or, some kind of protected class. You walked in one day and you said, I got to go on this awesome vacation, or, I won the lottery, or, I had an argument with my mom, and now they're mad at you because they think you were on the wrong side of the argument with your mom, or they wanted a Capricorn instead of a Taurus, right? Just any old thing. If it isn't in those protected classes, it's not illegal.
I see. It might be terrible and you don't want to go to work there anymore, but it's not necessarily illegal.
That's it. That's right. Yeah. So it really depends on the reason why. And then there can be rules that can be more binding, right? Company policies, like we treat each other with respect. Okay, well, that would block bullying if it's enforced. But if it's not enforced, the company's not liable for a lawsuit. Government's a little different. Those government policies can be more binding on the government. Also, sometimes those company policies can be contract issues. Remember, I mentioned those three private employment exceptions to employment at will: discrimination, retaliation, and whistleblowing, and contract issues. Sometimes those handbooks or policy manuals, if they're strong enough and clear enough and consistently enforced, and you have a good reason to rely on it, and you do, sometimes those can be binding, but it's really hard to make it happen.
I see. I kind of want to dig into some of that Swiss cheese just a little bit more before we move on, because we talked about discrimination, for example, and it can be it's not as clear cut maybe as we wish it were in every case. So, what are some of the ways that discrimination shows up that maybe people might miss or minimize?
Well, one thing that's actually pretty cool is over 30 years of doing employment discrimination work, it's faded a bit,
Hmm.
right? At times, and it's varied. It hasn't been just a consistent, slide out of our picture, and it's still here. But, a lot less often now, I don't really hear, my boss used a racial slur. My coworker, denigrated me because of my Jewish heritage. Sometimes more, people get hassled for being trans, that
Yeah.
happens, and it's overt. It's like the person thinks it's okay somehow to say these terrible things. But obviously enough to answer your question, the speech is the number one and the most obvious. And like I said, lately it's less common. People are sort of more educated to know what's right and what's wrong, and they avoid, saying the quiet part out loud sometimes. So sometimes the comments and slurs and jokes, and sometimes people kind of speak out of their stereotypes, and they don't really realize they're saying something that is kind of racist or kind of
Yeah.
discriminatory, sexist, etc. But more often now, what I see are the patterns. So the boss, not liking this protected group, treats most or all of the people in that group badly. So there's a pattern. And then one of the strongest lately, is that the reasons given for the adverse employment action don't make sense, or they're false. So the law really recognizes that if we can't explain that, if I can't say, gee, I'm a big fat racist, and so that's why I fired you, then I got to come up with some other reason, right? And so then I'll come up with a reason. And if that reason is BS, if it's inaccurate, if it's trivial, if it doesn't make business sense in the circumstances, then, we add that together with maybe the timing, right? It happened right after I took my medical leave, or it happened right after I told him to stop touching me that way, or her, we put together the pieces from the various parts that we have. So false reasons, patterns of discrimination, sometimes the language, timing, and it's kind of, it has to be a bit, it when you see it.
Yeah. So is this, and so help me understand the distinction here then, because it sounds like you're saying that even in an at-will state, which most of the states are, this is still wrong behavior.
Yes, still illegal, right? Discrimination's illegal. Retaliation's illegal. You have the right to take time off to take care of yourself or a family member with a serious medical condition. You can't, they can't hold that against you. You're in some states and locations, you're allowed to use your sick leave, right? You can, you're allowed to ask for, and if appropriate, receive an accommodation, and they can't hold that against you, although they don't have to lower their performance standards, So all of that stuff, or contract issues, like I talked about, all of that stuff is illegal. And we have to fit the bad behavior into one of those categories, if we're going to take any action.
Okay. What about pay issues as we're talking about this? Because I hear about this a lot. I read this a lot on the internet. Maybe someone is misclassified, exempt versus non-exempt, or maybe they're pressured or forced into unpaid overtime. Is that worth pursuing legally?
Yeah, mostly. I mean, just like with any, well, let's see, let me back up. Yes, because a couple reasons. One, it's your livelihood. You need the money. Two, let's not let this person get away with mistreating you. They'll keep on doing it and mistreat someone else. Three, there's attorney's fees available. So the amount of money in controversy isn't limited to the ripoff. Sure, they're underpaying you by 25 cents an hour for, the last month. It's not a huge amount of net dollars, but they're ripping off everyone. And if a lawyer proves it, the lawyer will get fees for their time in addition to the recovery. Sometimes it's yeah. So did I answer your question?
Yeah, it's. I mean, I think the bottom line is yes. Those kind of I don't know, wage theft from the employer side is still illegal, basically.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I didn't list that in my employment at will list, but I would call it a contract issue, one type of
Hmm.
contract issue. And, they can change your pay going forward, right? Even if it's a takeaway, so it's not pleasant and it's going to lead you to quit. They could say, hey, sorry, tomorrow we're cutting your pay by $1 an hour or by, 50% or whatever. They can't do it yesterday. You
Hmm.
already did the work.
Yeah.
So, offer letters matter for that kind of reason. When you are hired, they don't protect you from, um, like tomorrow they can decide they didn't need you on the job, but they have to pay you and fulfill the other terms of those letters. That's kind of contract.
Yeah, exactly. So what about kind of on the same lane? What about a bad performance review or maybe a surprise improvement plan you all of a sudden find out you're on? Is that grounds for a legal claim, or does there need to be more than just that?
Well, we got to go back to the why. We talked about exceptions to employment at will, and if I get a bad review, um, you know, it's not fair, it's unreasonable. It's really because someone else didn't do their job. That stuff isn't illegal. If it's really because they're trying to get rid of me because they think that now that I've had a baby, I'm not going to show up as often and I'm not going to get the work done, that's illegal. So the why is important. And there's a kind of a subtle concept, which is also, what's the harm, right? If you get a bad review, even if it's for an illegal reason, how did it affect your employment? So that bad review, then the next bad review, and then they put you on a performance plan and they fire you. If we can draw that line through it, or if it affects a bonus or pay or something like that, is clearly having an impact. But we have to establish an adverse employment action, not just a critical consideration of the quality of your work. It has
Okay.
to have an
So
impact
yeah.
otherwise.
So given all this we've talked about, in your experience, are these claims are they easy to prove? Are they hard to prove, or does it just depend on the case?
It's pretty hard. This is a hard area of law. I mean, if you're in a car accident, you were stopped at the stoplight and someone rear ends you, we know who's at fault, the bad driver in back. If we can establish what color the light was at the intersection, we know who's at fault in the personal injury case. Employment law is always about contested liability. They're always trying to show that there was some real justification. It wasn't the racism. It wasn't the medical leave. It wasn't the accommodation request. It was actually the pretext that they came up with. Your document that you wrote had commas in the wrong place, and you know, whatever. You're late to
Yeah.
work.
Right. So given that, what's your advice for someone who isn't maybe sure if they have a case or not? Something just feels wrong. They feel like they need to talk to someone or do something. What's your advice for that person?
Well, I think calling lawyers is a good idea. It's hard to get our attention. I know, I get too many calls. I can't help everyone. So I try to direct people in places where they can call a bunch until they can get through and, kind of get lucky. Sometimes you can hire a lawyer for a consultation, that kind of thing. You can educate yourself about, like this, what we're doing, right? I mean, at the end of this conversation, people probably will know that, whether whether they feel like they can prove that illegal motive or not, is a question. I think um, people do tend to underestimate their ability to prove the illegal motive well enough to get the company to change something, right? So
Mhm.
if you're being fired and you were on a medical leave, within the last 6 months, unless they've got a really good reason of bad performance after the medical leave, they probably are going to be paying a severance. Now, does that make sense to file a lawsuit over it? Not necessarily. But if they're giving you 2 weeks, and it feels pretty clear to you that the real reason was the medical leave, getting a lawyer to write a letter may get you 3 months instead of, or 6 months of severance instead of 2 weeks of severance. It's expensive to defend these cases as well. And, really a smart employer would rather have people depart under reasonable terms. It didn't work out. We hired you. We changed our mind. We don't want to hurt you. It makes economic sense for us, and publicity business sense for us to say, let's part on reasonable terms. We're not going to fight your unemployment. Here's, 2 months of pay so that hopefully you get another job. I mean, that's I think the norm. And when that's not happening, and it feels to the person, the employee, like something was illegal here, that's called a lawyer time.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that is the norm. That's been my experience of being in the workforce for a long time. And so I think the main takeaway is if your gut says something is off at work, don't ignore it. And you don't have to figure out the law on your own. So Stephen, thanks for bringing all this great information to us. I know we're going to help a lot of people. So thanks for coming on today.
I'm glad to get a chance.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, if you want to learn more, you can visit stellarlaw.com to speak confidentially with Steve and get the clarity you need. You can also check out our back catalog of podcast episodes and just learn a ton about employment law. And then, like, subscribe, share this episode so we can get this out to more people. And we'll see you next time on False Claims, Real Consequences.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.